Mr. President, over the past several weeks, there have been real discussions, bipartisan discussions about fixing the problems in the Affordable Care Act, about controlling the growth of premiums, about being sure that there is some certainty in the market to prevent the collapse of the individual market, which, by the way, will not only affect people who are participating in the Affordable Care Act exchanges, but will affect all those in the individual market, and we could stop that. And the Senate Health Committee had 4 days of hearings and roundtables, coffees with other senators to talk about what are the problems, what can we do to solve them, and we were making some real progress, and then all of a sudden, up comes Trump Care 4.0 or 5.0, I've lost track, another bill to essentially repeal and not replace the Affordable Care Act. On July 21st, 1861, there was an occurrence at the beginning of the American Civil War. It was the first Battle of Bull Run, and the Union troops were routed that day, and there was a disorganized retreat back toward Washington. That's been known historically as the Great Skedaddle. And that's exactly what's happening again today. This is the Great Healthcare Skedaddle, because what the Senate majority is doing is avoiding responsibility. You don't want to be discriminated against because of pre-existing conditions? Well, that's not our decision. We're passing it on to the governor. The governor can make that decision. It's not us doing it. You don't want to have the bans for the differential between young people and old people change so that elderly people pay twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times as much as younger people for health insurance. You don't want responsibility for that? Fine. Pass this bill and give it to the governors. That's what we're talking about here, is a cop-out. It is the Senate majority once again trying to jam down the throats of the American people a change they don't want. They don't want it. Everywhere I went in Maine in July and August after our vote back at the end of July, people said, thank you. They said, thank you, and they said, tell Susan Collins, thank you for the vote to preserve our health care. And yet, here we are, back at it again. But I think we need to understand what this bill does. Essentially, it does 2 things. It shifts all the responsibility for the health care provision to the most vulnerable Americans entirely to the states, with very little in the way of guardrails or protections, and it gives them less money in order to provide that kind of health care. That's called shift and shaft. Shift the responsibility and shaft the people who have to try to meet that responsibility. I've been a governor. What we're talking about here is cutting off the support and the dollars that are needed to meet those responsibilities. And everybody says, well, this is all flexibility. We're providing flexibility. Flexibility to make agonizing decisions between providing health care to seniors or to children, to people who are disabled, or people who are just trying to get on their feet and go to work without the specter of a health care disaster hanging over them. I suspect we'll have more to say about this next week, but it's a travesty. And I understand there's going to be a little hearing on Monday. I call it a fig leaf hearing. There's going to be a hearing. We don't know who's going to be there. We don't know exactly what the testimony is going to be. It's going to be a hearing so people can say, yeah, we had a hearing. Well, come on. This is not a responsible way to legislate, and the people of this country expect more of us. And I hope that both parties will recognize the folly of what's being proposed here and say no, and then let's go back to talking on a bipartisan basis and fix the problems with the American healthcare system, which certainly need to be addressed. Mr. President, I yield the floor.